All right, good evening, everybody. As we begin this meeting, I'll ask that all present silence your cell phones and other electronic devices and remind council that our procedure bylaw prescribes the use of technology during council meetings, council and committee meetings. It is 6 p.m. and I'll call this meeting to order. And I will do so by recognizing the traditional keepers of this land and specifically our neighbors of the Alderville First Nation with a formal territorial acknowledgement. We respectfully acknowledge that the municipality of Brighton is located in the Mississauga Anishinaabe territory and is the traditional territory of the Mississauga. The Council of the Municipality of Brighton recognizes that the Mississauga nations are the collective stewards and caretakers of these lands and waters in perpetuity, and that they continue to maintain this responsibility to ensure their health and integrity for generations to come. I have a motion moved by Councillor Fredis, seconded by Deputy Mayor Anderson, that the April 22nd, 2024 Committee of the Whole meeting agenda be approved as presented. Is there any discussion? All those in favor? There being none opposed, that motion's carried. Members of council, do you have any declarations of pecuniary interest? And if so, please state the general nature thereof. There are none noted. We have no listed delegations this evening, which brings us to citizens' comment. Are there any citizens' comment? Thank you. And so that takes us to staff reports. Our only staff report is with regard to the procedure bylaw review. I will turn the floor over to the clerk if she has any comments. And then my thought is that we would simply go through article by article. And if there's any questions or comments on each article, we'll stop and have that discussion. Madam Clerk.
I don't have anything right now.
Well, hang on tight.
Okay.
Of course.
I know that the clerks did a lot of work in making some proposed changes to this. I'm wondering if they could elaborate on the philosophy behind those changes.
Do you want to do that sort of as a general global question?
If there is a general or global philosophy behind them.
Because when we get to the articles where they have made changes, I would ask them to speak to those before council chimed in, but go ahead if you have a.
Well, the changes that I recommended are the ones that have come from the when they did Michelle's did the clerk on. They gave me a bunch of suggestions of different things that we could remove because we have policies for those areas and different ones like that. Also, just hearing when council was talking at the beginning, when we first started to meet, we were doing training and stuff, and you were going through the procedural bylaw, you had questions. So I just took a couple of notes from that. But basically it's from when we did our training. Okay, you're welcome.
Thank you both. Are we ready to go through? So Article 1, short title. Any changes, questions, or comments on that? Article 2, interpretation, definitions. These will change as we change the other portions of the procedure bylaw, but any comments or questions on those? Article 3, general provisions. Any comments or questions?
I'm
Councillor
still
Will.
scrolling down.
Okay, I'll wait. I'll try to be patient.
Page 25.
Thank you. I do have a question about Article 3.6. I've always been curious about this, not a critical necessarily, but why do we have assigned seating?
Because it's in our procedure bylaw. Madam Clerk.
Because it's always been there. We used to have where the mayor would shuffle people up every year. So then when we redid the procedural bylaw last term, they actually just wanted to have people sitting where they should be sitting and left them there. So that's why we have it. We don't have to have it. It's not something that is mandatory to have in a procedural bylaw. It's just a preference of the term of council of the day. we can remove it if you would like.
I wonder, I've seen some studies of the way that different bodies of elected figures sit. There's some that sit in sort of a military formation of one side versus the other, as they do in Parliament. And that was very deliberate because they really believed that the truth only comes out through debate and everything is a battle. And I think that we've seen how unhealthy that is for a democracy. Other more recent seating arrangements in some places have insisted on seating in a circular way, or mixing up how people are sat instead of having them all in the same party, that they're sat next alphabetically or next to their regional neighbors or things like that. I mean, obviously these things don't always apply here at the local level, but I do sometimes wonder what would happen if I were to switch nameplates and sit on the other side.
Well, if you've ever been to church and you change pews.
Yes, well, and that I have experienced that in church, and
Yes.
I think it's actually kind of healthy from
It is.
time to time.
In a church setting, it is healthy. From my perspective, it's just easier to be able to identify who's got their hand up without having to remember your name over and over again. I know everybody in this room, obviously, but you know, when we're in the middle of a meeting, someone throws their hand up and I know who I'm looking at quickly rather than having to use my now aging brain to remember names and stuff.
That's a good enough reason for me.
And the horseshoe, of course, is to allow David and Wayne, when he shows up, to be able to see and experience the council meeting. Councilor Rowley.
Thank you. I just think there's something to be said for a little bit of consistency and to kind of not only confuse even those coming in via Zoom or whatever they come in, right? They have an idea now who we are, where we are when you can't see everything. I think some things need to be constant. Some things need to be consistent. And this is a very simple one.
Yeah, and the line where it allows the mayor to switch up from time to time, haven't found the need to do that this term of council, but in a past term of council where sidebar discussions kept being had and it was tough to quiet people down, I after year one, I did make a seating rearrangement to stop those side discussions because we were constantly having sometimes 2 or 3 meetings going on at the same time. So it was just by switching a couple people around, it was easier to do. Anything from Article 4?
So wait,
Meetings.
do we want to leave?
Yeah, I don't see a want to make any changes. We're just having a chat.
Hmm?
Yeah, go ahead.
Before you go into number 4, 3 point, it's still 3.1. Would this be a good time to bring up the idea of excluding the phrase "your worship" from the terminology? It is an old colonialistic reference. I think we can be more than respectful without elevating someone to the point of "your worship."
We can have a conversation about it. I don't have an issue with that. However, I would point out that the Crown does provide elected mayors in all provinces except Quebec with the honorific, your worship.
Yep.
So removing it from the procedure bylaw doesn't change much.
No, but it is a statement.
Go ahead.
I have noticed that some very seasoned attendees of council meetings use that term very reflexively. They're very accustomed to that, and thus taking it out of here probably wouldn't change their actual behavior. That said, I have no problem with removing it here. I think I don't like the term personally. I think for the same reasons. And I don't know. I have noticed that we are getting a little bit more relaxed with some of the changes, for example, with dress codes, with honorifics that might be sort of considered in the same vein.
Councillor Fredis.
I see no problem with leaving it. We had the alternative of addressing Mr. Mayor. Um, it's kind of historical, longstanding. I don't know why we change it just because someone is not comfortable with history and the monarchy's role in our whole life. So I'm happy with it the way it is.
And at the end of the day, we are a colonial institution as a settler-based council. So go ahead, Councillor Wilden.
I feel like Councillor Freddish just gave me another reason to want to take it out. I'm not, not to get into questions about whether or not we respect history, but we do not live in the past. We can honor history without having to embody it in the present.
Go ahead, Councillor Butwell.
Thank you. I was going to just be quiet for once. And I agree with Mr. Wilden, or sorry, Councillor Wilden across the floor. Just because we've always done something some way doesn't mean that it was the right way to do it or that it needs to continue. I think that this chamber requires decorum and respect, and we can do that without using an antiquated term such as worship, your worship.
And I certainly don't require anybody to call me your worship. I've never corrected anybody in this place or anywhere else, but it is an honorific granted by, as I say, granted by the Crown through the federal government. So removing it from the procedure bylaw doesn't change a thing at the end of the day. Go ahead.
Very true. And much like I had brought the item up of the word stakeholder at a meeting about 5-6 months ago, but yet I still continue to see it in staff reports. So just because we say we don't want to see that word anymore, doesn't mean that people won't continue to use it. And I think that if nothing else, it makes a statement that we are accepting, reflecting of what happened or what has come and moving forward on a better foot forward.
I'm not in favor of removing it. Having fought to be here and fought to stay here, I'm certainly wanting the term to stay, not demanding anybody use it at the end of the day, though. So go ahead.
Quick question. Could you demand, could a subsequent mayor demand that people call them your worship? Could they?
Well, I think if they wanted to look like they're throwing a tantrum, they could.
So they could.
Yeah, well,
They could. Then I would be more in favor of it. I don't think that you're abusing that at all. I don't think the parties in this room are at all concerned with that.
Right.
But you are not going to be here forever.
that's probably true. Councillor Fredis.
To answer Councillor Butler's question, the way the bylaw is written is you can refer to the chair or the mayor or your worship. Some future mayor wanting to do that would have to have this bylaw rewritten to take out those other modifiers, and they would have a battle on their hands.
One would think. Councillor Rowley.
Thank you. Yes, and one word here says shall, it does not say must. So we can do as we wish. I want to go back to the whole constant consistency thing and the fact that the more we water some of this down, the more we water the consistency down, the more we water respect down. And there's a lack of that generally from everywhere. And I think we leave things like this alone. I don't need to use your worship. However, there are other options for me just to show my respect for the position as for everyone else who sits here. I don't call you by your first name here, or at least my intention is not to. And as I say, the fact that I see in every level, not just government, but we can talk about it in churches, we can talk about it in doctors' offices, we can talk about it in the schools. Lack of respect is starting to water down, and that really concerns me. I say we leave it alone.
Councillor Butwell.
Just wanted to make a note that it does say shall, and shall is a legal term that says you must. No, it doesn't say must, but shall is a legal term. That means you shall. Yeah. No, it's not. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it is shall, because the person in the chair is to be referred to as chair, or if it's me, mayor or Mr. Mayor, right? Because I'm in the chair at the end of the day. Councillor Wilden.
I just wanted to clarify that I think it's perfectly respectful when people call me by my name, and I tend to prefer that to any other titles. But so feel free to call me Jeff if you like.
Except here in this chamber, because I will correct you if you do. Councillor Butwell.
Just a point of interest, I think that it's interesting that that I also prefer my first name. That's what I've always been called. You can call me Councillor Butwell if you like. I may or may not answer, depending if I'm looking at you in the eye, but it might be a bit of a generational shift as well. I'm seeing that kind of playing out around. Yeah. Well, I have been known to say back in my day, so I know I've reached a certain generational chasm as well. This is not a hill I'm going to die on, but I would,
Councillor
make my
Wright.
point.
There is a municipality in Vancouver that changed the bylaw, their bylaw regarding this. And they replaced it with members shall address the chair as mayor or chair and shall address a member by that councillor's surname preceded by councillor. Because of the connotations that we've come to understand it
Yeah.
refers to.
Yeah, and the mayor of Calgary or Edmonton, I can't remember which, has asked that people not use the term,
Mhm.
your worship, but there's two among 1,500 municipalities or more across Canada. English-speaking municipalities, that is. Quebec does not use the term your worship. So it would seem that 3 would like it and 3 would not, and I don't know where the deputy mayor stands. Do you want to keep the term your worship in the bylaw? Or remove the term your worship from the bylaw? Leave it alone? Okay. So it's 4 to say leave it, 3 to say not. If everyone's okay, we're going to move on. Okay. Anything else in Article 3? Article 4, meetings. Anything there anybody wants to discuss? Actually, I'll go turn the floor over to the clerk because there are changes made in Article 4 on, I think it's page 30 of 85 for those of you on your iPads. 4.16. Madam Clerk.
Thank you, Mayor. It's the electronic participation. It's an addition. We just changed a few things up and tightened up, and just because it was a new add-on in 2021, we weren't quite sure how it would work, and so this is just a few minor changes.
Including the change to 4.15.7 on live streaming, right?
That's right.
So go ahead, Councilor Wilden.
Thank you. 4.15 is still titled electronic meetings during a declared emergency. But we now allow them in any respect. Is there something specific about emergencies and electronic meetings?
Yes, the
Yes.
difference is that during a declared emergency, the chair can zoom in. The chair does not have to be necessarily present, although I always came to the building anyway. We made that decision.
We
early
made that
on.
decision that you had to be in the building to be the chair, but in an emergency, you don't have to be in the building.
So 4.15 is all to do with a declaration, meetings during a declaration.
Mhm.
And 4.16 is electronic participation outside a declared emergency. Okay, got it.
That's right. Yeah.
Thank you. Anything else in number 4, Councillor Butwell?
Yeah, I have a couple of notes here. One being for, I guess it's not part 7. If the member, whether present in person or electronically after 2 attempts fails to vote and to respond to the call of their name, then the vote is recorded as no unless otherwise directed. How come we're calling the vote twice in that? Because that's a change from once, correct?
Sorry, where are you?
4.7.
4.7 or 417? On page 30,
4.16.7.
16.7.
Thank you.
Sorry, I haven't got there. Sorry,
No,
Ann,
no.
that was for attendance?
No,
No, I'm sorry.
no.
No, it's for voting during an electronic meeting.
I think what it's saying is that if they ask for your vote and
Next
they
page.
get no response, then they wait a sec and then
Oops.
they ask you again. And then they assume that it's a no, because if you were to abstain, it would ultimately be a no anyway if it fails. Is that correct?
I believe it was because, with it being electronic, we want to make sure, right? Because sometimes we don't see hands, you don't hear properly. I think that was the reason why we had originally done it that way. We had some issues through electronic meetings. I think that's the one.
When we were meeting
Mhm.
entirely on Zoom during the pandemic, we made a decision early on that all votes would be recorded votes so that we would know how people were voting and we didn't have to depend on people using hands, and the icons weren't there yet to put up your, we did, it was early days. And so we were just trying to figure all of this out.
But we did it twice because if you didn't hear us correctly,
Right.
right? So you're looking at us and we think that you heard us, but if we do it again, we just want to make sure that you did hear, because sometimes people are like, oh, right? And then they want to vote. So I think that was one of the reasons too.
Yeah, it's not necessary if we want to remove
No,
it.
we can
entirely.
remove it.
You're just trying to process. Okay. Councillor Fredis.
Thank you, Chair. My interpretation is the same as Councillor Wheeldon. It's because of electronics and difficulties. There was kind of two reach outs to get an acknowledgement.
Mhm.
I guess the classic example was the meeting we had at the community center relative to Gosport, and Councillor Butwell couldn't get a Zoom connection. Try as Jessica might. And then she had to resort to her telephone, and that had a glitch. And it was like 4 or 5 times we were trying to acknowledge that she was at the other end to cast her vote.
Right.
My only concern is recognizing the challenge with the electronics and broadband coverage generally, and that's a whole other issue. Whether that is adequate enough. I would hate to see someone be denied a vote because we asked them twice and they didn't get it at their end for some reason.
Yeah.
That would be my concern. And that has happened to us very recently.
And that's especially true if it's a close vote, when every vote counts at that point, right? That's especially true then. But every member of council has a right to vote and be heard. So we want to make sure that happens. I think that's the point. Councillor Wright.
My question on that particular statement, then the vote is recorded as no unless directed otherwise by the chair. How could that otherwise be directed?
It would only be if the chair thought the chair heard something differently from if the chair thought the member voted.
Right. Okay.
So then we would seek clarification at
Okay.
that point as well. Councillor Fredis.
Is perhaps a solution to that problem is if we have a participant who's doing it remotely, that they'll be recorded votes. That way you know that you're getting their input.
I think on a close vote, if we weren't sure if the person participating electronically had voted or how they voted, we would be wise to call a recorded vote. And my habit would be to do so, but that's just me. That's not now in the policy or procedure. So I think the intent here is to make sure that the participant electronically has the opportunity to vote and that their vote is appropriately recorded so that we know how they voted. But, it's also not appropriate, in my opinion, for one person to have to declare their vote and not for the other 6 members of council, right?
So through you, Mayor, we had an issue as well as people not voting either way. So when the mayor would call the vote, all in favor, they wouldn't vote, and opposed, still wouldn't vote. like wouldn't raise their hand. So we always thought, well, maybe they're just not hearing us clearly enough. And then maybe we need to do it one more time, just to make sure that this is exactly their intention, right? Or they just didn't hear.
Councillor Bothwell.
So in an unrecorded vote, the call would be all those in favor.
Yep.
All those opposed.
Yep.
And if not everyone votes, it is straight to all those in favor, all those opposed. Is it directed at individuals who didn't vote, or is it the same for everybody?
It's the same for everybody, but
Yeah.
we just say it twice,
Okay,
just in case.
okay.
We had a council member that had a hearing issue on one term of council, and yeah, it was an issue. And then he's like, oh, yeah.
May I ask a secondary tiered question? The new microphones, et cetera, that we have, does it have the technology to put yays and nays in?
Oh, we haven't picked those out yet, so we can,
Because that would allow us.
most of the new ones do have that option now.
They do, yeah.
Yeah.
I would, I much prefer recorded votes because even myself, I sometimes forget how I voted on something. And if we did have a way of recording it, it would be nice to be able to look it up and go, okay, that's, it's
Mhm.
happened to me already.
Mhm.
I've forgotten how I voted on something. A lot of what we do is administrative, right? Like,
Right.
Yeah.
so it's nice, it would be nice, in sourcing those materials, if that could be considered.
Yes, for sure.
Anything else on this particular item, 4. Where we're at? 4.16.7. Let's just make sure we're clear on that. We're just leaving it as is. Is that the want? Yeah, okay. Anything else in Article 4 to discuss? Move on to Article 5, roles. There were no changes by the clerk. Members of council, any comments or questions or discussion points for Article 5? I guess my question would be, is it necessary? Is Article 5 at all necessary? And most of this stuff is detailed in the Municipal Act, with the exception of the chair of meetings, but hmm? Oh, so we could just incorporate it there. I just don't see the need for Section 5. As I say, the duties, the roles and responsibilities are listed and laid out in the Municipal Act, so I'm not sure why we'd repeat them here in this procedure bylaw, but the Municipal Act supersedes the procedure bylaw anyway. Everyone okay scrapping Article 5? Any objections? Article 5 is out. Which means Article 6 becomes Article 5, but Article 6, duties. There were some changes here under 6.2.4 has been removed. Madam Clerk. Understood. Madam Deputy Clerk.
I suggested the removal of that, because it's some, I can't remember the exact section number, but it's covered in another section, how, it's handled when a mayor would like to make the or a chair would like to make the motion or debate.
Right. So it's also covered in both Roberts and Borano's rules of order. However, the Municipal Act gives the mayor full voting privileges. Right.
So this is if you wanted to move your own motion.
Right.
Then you would step down from chair seat and allow the
Right.
deputy chair to step in. And it's covered in another section. I can,
8.13.
thank you.
Okay. Okay. So that's why that was removed. Thank you. Members of council, anything else in Article 6? Councillor Butwell.
Just a point of clarification, since we're crossing over multiple things. This pertains to when the chair of the meeting wishes to move a motion and or discuss a motion on the floor, correct? Or debate, sorry, debate.
Yes.
Yes, so the debate piece, is that still? It is still within there, thank you.
Anything else in Article 6? Let's move on to Article 7, which has been removed or changed entirely, totally removed. But 7.1 use of technology, 7.2 use of technology on page 38 is still there. Should it be removed as well? You really should be speaking into a microphone. I understood. Oh, I understand.
Yeah, so the Article 7 that is crossed out and in red is basically a copy paste of your code of conduct. Just doesn't need to be in there. You have a policy for that.
Right.
The Article 7 below it for use of technology was part of the bylaw itself. And it being renumbered is just because of the removal of the Article 7 originally.
So Article 7 should now read Article 7 use of technology.
Yeah.
Okay. And then 7.1 would be technology council and committees, and 7.2 is technology patrons.
Correct.
Got it. Okay. So we just need to add a title there of Article 7. No, it's not. Not on mine anyway. Perfect. Councillor Wheeldon.
So to be clear, the things that are being removed here are already present elsewhere. And so we're not actually removing these things from our experience as counselors, only from this document.
Correct, because it's already in our code of conduct.
Councillor
my-
Bow.
Oh,
Go
sorry.
ahead. No, go ahead.
So my comment earlier about not having a dress code anymore is not correct.
Is there a dress code in our code of conduct? Well, we can revisit the code of conduct another night. We probably should anyway, yes. Okay, so Article 7 is the use of technology. We've removed the former Article 7 because it's our code of conduct and we've got it in another policy. Anything else on Article 7? Go ahead, Councillor Bell.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Very quick point. So the nature of my business is such that I am sometimes on call. We've had a few occasions and I don't think it's been terribly disruptive. So I'm hoping that we can perhaps insert something that would protect that. So when I am dealing with clients, I always tell them there's no real estate emergencies. And if there are, then it's a lawyer thing and they're not open at night anyways. But there are times that I have contracts going back and forth. And I have a fiduciary obligation to them to be responsive. I generally, up to this point, have let the mayor know ahead of time that I've got something going on and I might have to step out. So I would love to be able to see something like that included there because the nature of my work is different than a traditional 9-to-5 job.
So I think if we were to add to B, refrain from using technology during council, et cetera, to communicate with members of council or advisory committee, is something about with regard to the business of council. But for other uses.
Like I'm not texting with people for fun.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Or trying to seek somebody's opinion on what we're discussing at council. You're using it for
selling
an
it.
urgent issue.
Something
your
that-
business.
Pressing, yes. So
Yeah.
time is of the essence is also something I have to be very careful of in what I do. So when I receive or send information, my clients are deemed to have received or sent information, and time limits play into it.
Well,
It's only happened a couple times.
yeah, but you don't sit there and do it.
No.
You excuse yourself.
Yes.
So then you're not using the technology in the chambers.
Well, I'm peeking looking for it. Like now it's on silent,
Right.
but you're hearing the buzzing because.
Deputy
It's-
Clerk.
It specifically says, in B, to communicate with other members of council or advisory committees and or members of the public. And in general, I would think that that's somebody who's watching the committee, sitting in the, that's what I think that we're trying to avoid. Not you checking.
No,
If an-
understood, but a
yeah.
member of the public would be my client as
Mhm.
well.
But it also says unless emergency circumstances require otherwise.
But it's not an
Yeah,
emergency.
this isn't a heart surgery issue,
Yeah.
right? This isn't.
It's not an
someone's child fell
emergency. It
down.
is, like I said, we have a fiduciary obligation to be responsive in certain circumstances.
I think if we just add for the purposes of council business in there,
Mhm.
then we're covered because you are not doing that for the purpose of council business. You will excuse yourself if you
Right.
need to make a phone call. I don't think anybody has that issue around the horseshoe, but I think you're right. I mean, for your purposes,
Mhm.
you don't want to be tossed out of the meeting because you were, but your phone was buzzing,
Mhm.
which I wouldn't do.
But
But
again, I don't think it's you,
I understand.
but it may not be you one day
And I understand that too.
or me.
So if after or members of the public for council business, I think that solves the problem right there. Is everyone okay with that? Yeah, okay. Council or municipal business, whatever we put there. Anything else in Article 7 to discuss? Article 8, Rules of Debate. The clerk has made no changes to that. Members of council. We good to move on? Article 9, closed session. And there is a change, Madam Clerk.
We completely removed it because we have the protocol in place now,
Right.
so it replaces that.
Questions or comments from members of council on Article 9? Council Wright.
Sorry, just to be clear, 9.1 remains, but 9.2 is removed.
That is correct.
Okay.
Nine point two through to 9.11, all
Yeah.
inclusive,
Yeah.
are removed. Yeah.
Because it's the procedures that we put in place for our protocol that we have, yeah,
So we have another policy that covers that.
right.
Yeah. Anything else on 9? So Article 10, violation of confidentiality policy. And there are some changes there. Well, you've removed that entire section, eh?
Right, because it's in our code of conduct.
Got it. So that's all covered in the code. Okay.
Mhm.
So old Article 10 is removed. New Article 10 is general order of business. There is a change. 10.3.8. The clerk has removed the citizens' comment and question period section. Madam Clerk.
It was suggested at our training with Michelle that we that we remove it. Or remove one or the other, or both. And it's entirely up to council. I just removed it just for those purposes.
It isn't used very often.
Not at all.
That's true. I'm not sure it behooves us to remove it, though.
Now, you had mentioned something about, sorry, Mayor, having it as an option,
I know, but
like what one or the other, right?
right.
And so instead, maybe keep citizens' comments as it can be comments to anything on the agenda and just not having question period. It's entirely up to council what they want to do with that.
Councillor Fredis.
You're quite right. We don't get a lot of participation, but I'm not inclined to take out either. I think they are distinctly different. And I think it's imperative that we appear to be open and transparent and receptive to residents' concerns, questions, comments. I think it would be a terrible mistake to take either of those out.
And they are time limited. They're both time limited, so it's not like unless council chooses, it's not like we're having a delegate in place of a delegation. We've created rules to make sure that doesn't happen, right? So go ahead, Councillor Reddy.
I'm in agreement with Councillor Paredes as well. The same thing, it would be nice if we had more public engagement in the council chambers where we could hear and see folks instead of reading it on social media. This would be a much better place for stuff like that. So absolutely, let's invite the public so we can hear exactly what their questions and their comments are. And I don't have to read the Brighton residents page.
But what would you do on a Saturday night? But what would you do on a Saturday night? Councillor Wheeldon.
I should say that I did receive one comment from one of the only people who's ever used question period, reminding me of why it was brought in the first place. And so thank you for that feedback, sir.
I think a few of us got that.
I didn't.
No, you did not. So we're keeping it.
Okay.
All right. So uncross those lines.
Okay.
We're going to keep that. Anything else in section 10, article 10 that we want to discuss? You have also removed delivery of the agenda stuff. Because
I do have something there.
go ahead.
In 10.3.7, adoption of minutes. Maybe we'll deal with it under Article 12. Because it just says see Article 12. So I'll wait.
Very well. Sorry, so 10.2 has been removed, Madam Clerk.
Yes. The Michelle's had advised that that was probably better to take it out. It's just it's a procedure for the clerk's department, basically, right? So it's more of an operational than it is.
It's not a procedure bylaw
Right.
issue. Yeah. Understood. Anything else in Article 10, members? Article 11, quorum. No changes there. Members of council, anything you want to see different? Going to move on to Article 12. Minutes. There are no changes there from the clerk's perspective. Members of council,
Oh, wait, Jeff had it.
Councillor Wheeldon,
Thank you. It has struck me that the nature of minutes is that they focus on what has been moved and passed rather than what has been discussed, what kind of information has been shared, that kind of thing. But when we approve the minutes, often a committee has discussed a great many things but has moved nothing. And so I wonder if we might get a better sense of what was happening at committee if one of the counselors who was present in that committee were to speak to the minutes and provide information to council at that time. Because I honestly, when I do read the minutes, I'm often tempted to skim or skip because there is often not a lot of actual content there, and it's hard for me to contextualize what content is there. But if somebody could just speak to what was discussed there and what kinds of things are happening, I think I would find that very interesting, and it would be more accessible to the public that way as well.
I think that's not a bad idea. If council reps can come prepared to speak to the issues that they're responsible for. Is that fair? So we could just we don't need to change anything in the agenda. I would just ask the rep to speak to the issues at hand at the committee when we go to talk about the minutes. Madam Clerk?
Also, there's always an opportunity for the committees to provide an annual report. So if they haven't made any recommendations to council, but they can do a report to council. This is what we've discussed. These are the different, avenues that we've been thinking about, but we didn't bring anything forward. But you know what I mean? Or we did through the minutes, but it's just a report. And we used to do that a lot before. Kind of got away from it.
Thank you for that. That is also a good idea. I was thinking back to when we had the Sustainability Advisory Working Committee. We did a lot of heavy thinking for almost a year and had nothing in our minutes to show for it. While we were as a working committee, we didn't have official minutes. I was keeping some notes as the chair then, but we were doing a lot of work, but when it came down to the review of the committee, it looked like we had done nothing. And so it would have been great to, when things like that happen, to be able to just hear exactly what is going on, what they're working toward. Because sometimes the stuff that we're doing takes 2 or 3 meetings duration before we've actually achieved anything that we can bring forward. So knowing that things are happening, even if they don't show up in the minutes yet, is, I think, really valuable. And an annual report probably wouldn't catch that. But annual report is also an interesting idea that I like.
That would be up to each individual committee to do that as they choose to. So that's something as council reps you can encourage if that's what you wanted to do. Councilor Belwell.
Thank you. One thing that I do notice about reading those monthly minutes that are submitted for us for approval, even our own minutes, is that they're, from the public's point of view, if they want to go back and find out what happened, they're not descriptive at all. They don't tell you what was discussed. It's an in and it's an out. And any committee that I have sat on outside of the municipal realm has always included a brief summary of what happened at that meeting. Is there a reason why we don't do that?
Because the municipal act requires the clerk to keep the minutes of the business of council, and the business of council are the motions that we make, not the discussion in the background. But anybody can go listen to the recordings if they choose to do that.
So what about committees then? We're talking about committees as well.
One would hope that the committee members would be keeping their own notes
Okay.
so they can refer back to them.
So what about members of the public that might want to understand what a committee is doing?
All committees are open to the public. They're welcome to come.
And so we had discussed through the JEDI committee and I had raised the issue about recording these meetings, and it apparently had been a recommendation of the accessibility committee to council, and we were going to discuss that and received a lot of pushback from that. Is that so that these committee meetings are occurring during the day when the majority of people are not able to attend. So there's no way for them to interact with the information without minutes that are descriptive and or recordings. So I realize I'm getting off topic here or into a different article through this, but I would love to be able to see something like that.
Where would that fit into this if we were to talk about the broadcasting and recording of back in the tech?
Because it says that that they may be recorded. If we go back, it says they may be recorded, but so far all I understand as being recorded is our committee of the whole, council meetings, planning sessions, things that happen on Monday or Tuesday evenings. I would like to be able to say to the people in the community that they could see what's happening on committees while they're at work or watching their children or something like that.
Madam Clerk?
Through you, Mayor. So when we did the live streaming, way back in 2017, I think it was, we did a policy for live streaming. So we know how long to keep the recordings, all that kind of stuff, right? And it was only council. It wasn't committees. So it's just the only time we ever did committees was through COVID when we were meeting virtually because they're public meetings. So they had to be out to the public. So they are able to watch if they wanted to. That's the only time we've ever done it. We had a little pushback from quite a few of the committees that didn't want to even do that. They didn't want to be recorded. They didn't want to be on live stream. But that's the only.
So what is the reason for not doing it? That I understand you say committee members may not want to be on, but they step forward to a public committee. So what would be the?
There is no reason why we cannot, if we are able to, if all the meetings are in this room, which I think generally all of the meetings are here, then we can record them. There's not an issue of why not. It's just if the people and majority of the committees has Jessica or Robin or myself on them.
And just a comment about committee members. There was pushback when we live streamed through COVID. And I suspect there would be pushback again. And while they stepped up to a public committee, I'm struggling to get committee members now. I would be fearful of committee members continuing to step down if we were to live stream, especially the ones, especially if it became a permanent thing. You know, it was kind of sold through COVID as it's just through COVID. It's just while we can't open to the public. Now that we can open to the public, where once the restrictions were lifted in about 2022 and we were able to have fully public meetings, was when we stopped the live streaming. Committee members themselves feel more comfortable talking and getting their business done without live streaming. And this is just my personal experience I've dealt with every single committee we have. You know, they feel more comfortable speaking and getting their business done without the live streaming. Everybody's a little more on edge and anxious when there's live streaming going on. It's just people don't feel they can speak comfortably, specifically with, say, the JEDI committee, where there's some really sensitive topics that are being discussed sometimes. The other feeling that I've gotten from committee members is just, you know, they're not elected officials and they don't want to be live streamed and scrutinized like an elected official. And again, just in discussions with committee members and my dealings with every single committee member we have, I fear that you're not going to get committee members. Specifically, the big fear is the ones that have required numbers of committee members, such as the accessibility committee, where there has to be a certain ratio of persons with disabilities on that committee, and your heritage committee, who has to have a minimum of 5. There's ones that I'm struggling to get a 6th committee member to kind of cover our heritage committee's membership right now.
And so as a follow-up, instead of live streaming, could we record? That way their faces do not appear online. And I will say that from an accessibility standpoint, there are a great number of people who either have mobility issues, who have just the inability to get here. And from an accessibility standpoint, I think that there should be some sort of recording that they can access or that somebody else in this community can listen to.
I would say there's a few aspects there. It's still very similar. There, you know, if they're recorded, their spaces are still going to be shown to whoever is requesting it, the recording.
We're
would-
talking about an audio recording.
That's something different. I would have to, I personally have never done audio recording. I've only ever done the live streaming or
I
the
think
recording
we could do
itself.
it through Zoom and just keep a black screen.
I still feel that
The conversation won't be the
it won't be
same.
the same.
And then the other thing would just be, you know, anytime somebody emails me and asking for a recording is just something else to add to my list of things I have to do every day.
And I sympathize and I empathize with you because my business is very structured as well. When it comes to public engagement, I don't see how saying that people are nervous about, say, for example, their voice being heard. I don't think that's a terribly strong foundation to stand on. Accessibility, community engagement, to me, just demands that it be accessible to the community.
I would
Oh.
be concerned about committee engagement, that's all.
Councillor Fredis.
Through the chair, thank you. I agree with the deputy clerk and the clerk entirely. There are 3 committees I'm involved with. And the prevailing view is you're the elected representative. It's bad enough that you have the door open so anybody can walk in. And I'm worried about being harassed or attacked in Sobeys or no frills. So I'm kind of sensitive to that. I think you're going a step too far. It's quite appropriate though for us councillors on a committee to make notes and when the minutes are filed with council to elaborate further. But I don't think we should be putting residents through that sort of stress.
Yeah, our committee members are not well-paid public servants at the end of the day. The $60 a meeting they're getting is an honorarium and it's a nice to have, but they're not being paid to be scrutinized by the public. So I'm sensitive to both sides of this argument because I get where you're coming from. At the end of the day, our committees are being held, you know, during the day when people are at work. It's hard enough to get the committee members to come out during those times if they have children or if they have obligations, daytime obligations, let alone citizen members. I mean, we hold these meetings in the evening, both to accommodate working schedules for our members of council, but also so that, you know, people who work can come to these council meetings. And yet, you know, the usual suspects here are the ones who show up, right? I'm talking about you two at the back, yeah. And sometimes one other or 2 others. I mean, we used to get, our usual suspect used to be about 6, and it's dwindled down to 2. Councillor Wheeldon.
Thank you. I really do respect where you're coming from in terms of wanting to have more opportunity for public engagement and even public scrutiny. I do think that there is a distinction between members of committees who are participants from the public and members of council who are representatives of the public. We hold the public trust as councillors, and so we are therefore subject to public scrutiny, but that happens at council meetings. Any business of a committee that is going to actually do anything becomes the business of council through the motion that is passed forward. So that's where public scrutiny of committee work comes in, is when we bring it with us to council. In terms of participation, the clerks and I have discussed this. We actually, Jessica and I discussed this after the Jedi meeting at which you had brought that idea up. That discussion had continued after you had to leave. And she pointed out that if there is desire for someone to participate on a particular issue or agenda, that they are able to ask, and we can sometimes move a meeting time to accommodate somebody if they need to participate. And so we can sometimes make special exceptions for people to help them participate, but in terms of having our meetings available online for public scrutiny, the participants from the public, I agree with Councillor Ferreira, should not be subject to that kind of scrutiny, especially in an online environment, which, as we know, is much more toxic than an in-person environment. You know, I have been taking myself offline as much as possible for that reason, and I'm much healthier and safer for it. I'm quite certain, especially with the Jedi Committee, that we would very quickly have no members if they were put online, and even having their names online connected to a meeting where we discuss, and they're recorded to be discussing matters of racism or sexism or other things like that, the gender identity there, and not necessarily even from our own residents. We know we've been petitioned, our library has been petitioned by people to remove certain books, and it was discovered that these people who were petitioning them were not Brightonians at all. Likewise, I have received threatening messages online from people, it turns out, who are not Brighton residents. And so the more we put sensitive matters out online, the more not that we invite that kind of negativity, but certainly we become more vulnerable to it. And given that nothing will come of anything at a committee unless it's brought forward to council anyway, I think that's where any public scrutiny needs to be focused. Does that make sense?
If I may.
You may.
So the word scrutiny implies something very negative, correct? Scrutiny? No, when my colleagues are speaking about it, it comes across as negative. Speaking specifically for the Jedi Committee, of which we're both on it, not putting the information out and staying behind closed doors, so to speak, figuratively, actually is more concerning to me than putting my name out there on something. I appreciate that members of the public may feel uncomfortable, but these are open doors, and if people aren't walking through them, we want to hear what the members of our community are thinking. Sometimes we don't like what they're thinking, and sometimes it is incredibly toxic and angry. I'm all for increased participation in whichever way possible. If we had something someone could listen to, right? Anyway.
Okay, so good discussion. Rather than continue to talk about it, I'd be curious where we're all at. How do members of council feel about including live streaming or recording or some level of audio or video recording for our committees? Is that something we want to continue to go down? You're saying no, you're saying no, you're saying yes, you're saying yes, you're saying no.
I can see both
do
sides
too.
of this coin, and so I understand the possible distress that it could cause a public member who's on a committee. They're already putting their time and energy forward, and I can see where they don't want the scrutiny, for lack of a better word. But I also agree that we need to be as open and as accessible as possible. Maybe it's not so much about having a recording, but if there's someone who wants access to a meeting that can't be physically here due to accessibility issues or whatnot, then there would be maybe a special exception made for a Zoom meeting in that particular meeting. that already exists. So
If a member of the public wanted to zoom into one of our meetings, they could reach out to the clerk and say, I'm not going to participate. I can't participate, but I would like to hear what's happening. I'd like to zoom into that meeting, and the clerk will provide them with the link to that for that purpose. So microphone, please, because we do want to be accessible to the people on YouTube right
How
now.
ironic. So that would require someone to be able to sit and participate in the meeting
At that time.
live at that time. And perhaps the whole reason they are not here, one, I think we have a communication issue, which is a whole separate thing. But two, if they're at work, they're not going to be able to sit there and live listen to it. Doesn't solve anything.
Yeah.
So again, the chair could work around that by changing the time of the meeting. If there's an issue, I mean, if it's a constant ongoing, like I'm just curious and I want to know, I'm not as sympathetic to that. But if it's I have an issue that I want this committee to deal with, and I want to hear what happens when it's being dealt with, then I think a conversation with the clerk and the chair to shift the time of the meeting to accommodate could happen, would happen, and would be accommodated for.
There are lots of residents who just want to know what's going on. They don't feel like they understand anything that happens behind these walls.
And those same residents probably would never
Right.
listen to the recording.
Right, possibly.
Yeah.
And if nobody ever accesses it, then it's not cost us any time.
Well, but it
Sorry.
has. We're adding now a process to the whole committee meeting
Which is to hit a record,
regime, which is
to set it up and record and download the file and, yeah.
Right. 100%. So Councillor Frevis.
I still think that the simplest solution is, because there is a council member on every committee, when the committee's minutes come, it should be obligatory that the councillors speak for a couple of minutes to highlight some of the issues that were covered. That way it is available on the YouTube. Anybody that wants to follow up can then follow up with the appropriate councillor, because they pay us the big bucks to take that heat from the public. The residents who are part of the committee didn't sign on for that. And as the deputy clerk has pointed out, that scares some of them away. The other thing is, we're constantly jockeying meeting times to try and accommodate our residents to ensure we have quorum. We talked about accessibility. I mean, the accessibility committee even had to allocate some funding for Quinte Transit for a couple of their participants to get them to meetings. Now, one of them has a van, but doesn't always have a driver when he gets his wheelchair on there to bring him to the meeting. I just learned this recently and said, Justin, I live around the corner. Call me. If you'd let me drive your van, I'll bring you here. But he wasn't aware of that option. His father's not always available. So his recourse was to phone Quinte Transit to get here. But there are a lot of people that don't know that there is that opportunity for them. So I think we're just making it more complicated than it needs to be. I think a simple councillor report with any committee that you're attached to, when their minutes appear on the agenda, it ends up on YouTube, and anybody that chooses to follow up can then do so.
Councillor Boutwell.
So we have a committee member who we accommodate, and we should, but we cannot accommodate the person who cannot be here on the day of the meeting.
No, that's not true. We could accommodate them if they asked to be accommodated. The chair of the committee and the clerk could work with that member of the public to set the meeting time for when they are available. And so
I
you know,
think
we run through these motions to be transparent and accountable, and great, we really should. The fact of the matter is, we are the most transparent and most accountable level of government on the face of the planet. We can't go into caucus meetings. You know, we go into closed session to deal with, those 8 things that the Municipal Act permits us to go into closed session about. But, all other things must be done in the light of day. And if the people choose to come and hear what we have, or choose to show up online, or choose to download the video later, great. I mean, that's how this level of government should operate. I think then when we, the elected, go out to the people of Brighton and say, would you please join our committee and help us make decisions, give us recommendations on how we should act. And then, oh, by the way, we're also going to stream your opinions and your values live out into the public. I agree with the clerks that what we're doing is now narrowing the already narrow band of folks who would be interested in doing that. And that is, I know we have had committee members leave knowing that their information would be broadcast. So it's hard enough to get people to participate. Councillor Wheeler.
I will say that at that Jedi meeting, after you left, we continued that discussion, and every member of the committee said they would not participate if they were recorded. So it's literally the whole committee would not engage in that, and I don't blame them, because it is very sensitive stuff that ultimately does not, the business of the committee does not necessarily happen in that committee. Where they have a big discussion, maybe have some opinions aired that are likely unpopular, and then we pass a motion to refer some advice to council, and then it's at the council meeting where anything happens. So somebody who just wants to know what's happening will not learn anything at a committee meeting other than an item that might be on the next council agenda. The thing that happens is happening at this table during a council meeting, not at any committee meeting. So keeping people informed still happens best through council. The option of giving people a sneak peek of that by giving them access to what might be a sensitive and contextual conversation isn't worth the risk of putting that on the internet and inviting the trolls, not just of our own residents, but all from everywhere, who are already part of coalitions across the country that are trying to push a particular agenda. So when our own committee tells us that they would quit if we did that, I think that's worth it in itself, because we won't be able to replace them.
CEO.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to you and the rest of council, I will preface this by saying we're on to week 3. I can still use that I'm new for a little while. But just listening to the discussion around the table and the comments from the clerk's department, I don't disagree that these committee meetings should be transparent. And I think a lot of municipalities are going in that direction. Many still keep them out of the live stream realm. They don't record them. But I do see more and more that are taking that approach. I also appreciate the fact that we may lose members. So if it's something that we're going to revisit, probably a larger look at our committee structure and how they're run, something we can bring back to council before we go back out and fill these committees again, with an approach that may include some live streaming, may include recording, so that these members know ahead of time when they're making the application that this is the expectation. Just in the conversation, these committees are accountable to council. And if it makes me a little uncertain about the appropriateness of some of the conversations. So I think we need to be aware of that as well. And potentially recording or live streaming could prevent some of those conversations, or having a situation that might occur that we might not like to have occur. But I do believe that the members we have now, based on the clerk's comments and the deputy clerk, that to change it overnight probably is not the best approach, but something long-term that we can look at and come back to council, possibly with the comments coming from council members during our meetings, our council meetings about the committees. Maybe that will be enough for some of those members that can attend, and we can reevaluate them when we bring it back. If council would like to go in that direction, we can certainly put that call out. And if we don't get the members, we can deal with it then. But I think giving council or giving staff an opportunity to come back with something larger that really identifies the expectation, so that the members that are applying would know, would be a better approach.
Anything further from members of council? Thank you, CEO. So we're gonna leave it as is for now. Let staff come forward with a report at some point. This isn't urgent, right? We're good. And probably it's a change we should consider for a future council, because they're going, they're going to want to set their own committees and their own committee structure on the advice of staff who may have advice with around live streaming for that next council. Rather than, like, we don't want to change our committee structure in this term of council, I don't think. So I'm not getting the sense that there's anything urgently needed to change. We've added some committees and things seem to be running fairly smoothly. Councillor Butwell.
Thank you very much. And I don't disagree that just changing things overnight would be highly unpalatable, I believe. Pushing this off to a subsequent council, by the time they get around to their review, they're going to be a year and a half into it as well, and then it's going to push it off again. So it would be nice if perhaps we could readdress this prior to the expiration date of this council.
And that's what I meant. We would make the change for the future council,
Okay.
so that when they constituted their committees, it would be a new system, perhaps with live streaming or some sort of audio recording. Councillor Wright.
So would it be appropriate to put a motion on the table to ask for a staff report with an end date 6 months before the end of this council to review that policies to have something in place?
Do you require that direction?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Wright, I do love emotions. I have it captured. I can assure you we'll add it, but emotion will never hurt.
Councillor Butwell.
All right, then I would like to make that motion.
And I will
Direct-
second it.
Thank you. I guess directing, is it the clerk,
Direct staff.
direct staff?
Mhm.
To bring back some wording on, is it wording on changing the procedural bylaw to include audio and or visual recordings, recommendations for all committees? Recommendation, thank you.
Here's what I wrote. The council directs staff to provide a report on recording committee meetings. Yep.
And I'd like to put an end date on that.
Yep.
Please and thank you. I'd say maybe by, when do nominations open?
May 2026.
So
May
then
1st,
maybe
2026.
March of 2026.
Yes, sir.
The CAO had mentioned a review of committee structures and procedures. Would it be appropriate to have a fulsome report of committees in general?
CAO.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Wilden, that would be my intent. So I know when you mentioned Councillor Butwell initially, the procedural bylaw, I was like, don't tie it to the procedural bylaw necessarily, but Mayor Ostrander has made the motion vague enough that we certainly will come back with something. And again, that's partly my ignorance because I haven't had an opportunity to review that. Assuming that councils put their committee members in place by term, my thought was to look at this prior to the next term.
So I've written on recording committee meetings and committee structure on or before March 2026. Fair? Councillor Fredis?
I have a problem with committee structure. It almost sounds like this council is trying to set committees for the next council, and that should really be their decision, not this group inflicting it on the next group.
So that happens anyway, because the clerk will start advertising for committees after the election, but often before the council is inaugurated. So those advertisements go out based on the former. So the council can come in and say, no, we're not filling that committee because we're getting rid of that committee. By the way, we're also adding these 7 committees. That's up to the new council to do. But based on whatever decisions we make and have made, the clerk will advertise for a JEDI committee, and the clerk will advertise for a rural advisory committee, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, based on past practice. The new council might not want a rural advisory committee or a JEDI committee or whatever. I mean, there are certain statutory committees that have no choice, but a lot of our advisory committees are not statutory. They are by, so future council can make that decision, but this council will still set the will set the bar, the rollout for that. The future council will make will add and delete committees as they choose.
Okay, providing they're not setting it in stone for the next council. I just want to ensure the next council has the latitude to implement what they feel they need.
The only thing we ever set in stone is financial obligations. When we buy something that has to be paid for over time. Councillor Wheeldon.
Thank you. I do want to elaborate a little bit on what I meant by structure, what I heard the CAO when she used those kinds of words. I know that I've had a lot of frustration from some of my committee members, and I've heard some frustration from some staff about committees and how we communicate, how effective committees are, or sometimes ineffective. And I think that there are small changes that we can make, such as the one we discussed earlier about having one of us speak to what happened at a committee meeting. Those little changes can actually go a long way toward having a more engaged committee that feels like they're actually accomplishing something. So that's what I mean when I ask, is there a way we can revisit committee structure? I mean, can we look at the way that we do this and see if we can do it in a way that leads more people to want to engage because they feel like they can really get something done here?
Councillor Freitas.
Councillor Willen, I think you and I are saying the same thing. We're just using different words. You're talking structure and I'm talking communication, which is a prevailing issue with virtually every committee. Communicating what it is they're doing. And maybe the place to start is we as councillors, when the minutes are there, talking about what the committee's doing. Our members will then feel that their efforts are being recognized and acknowledged, but without exposing them. And maybe that's what it comes down to. So I think you and I are saying the same thing, just using slightly different nuances or words.
So I have that moved by Councillor Butwell. Is that correct, Councillor Butwell? And is there a seconder? Councillor Wright, thank you. And Madam Clerk, we're in committee of the whole, so should this be written as a recommendation to council? So I've added the words that committee of the whole recommend that council direct staff, et cetera, et cetera. Councillor Butwell, you're okay with that change? Councillor Wright? Anything further from members of council? Those in favor? Any opposed? Motion's carried. All right, where were we? Article 12. It's good discussion. Article 12 included, what is it? It is the minutes. That's what we were talking about. Anything further on Article 12? We'll try not to digress this time. Article 13, delegations, presentations, petitions. Madam Clerk, you have made some changes to 13.5.
Mhm.
Any comment on that, Madam Clerk?
Nope.
No? Go ahead, Councillor Wheeldon.
I know that some jurisdictions have a threshold for a number of signatures on a petition before it can be heard.
Yeah.
Okay, I didn't see that there. Thank you.
Anything else in 13 from members of council? Article 14, motions in general. There are no changes or deletions from the clerk's office. Members of council? There is not a number in this. We're going back to 13 now.
I'm not averse to discussing a petition that only has one signature on it. They might as well sign up for citizens' comments. But is that something that
We can add.
Yeah, I think before a petition is accepted, there should be a specific number. It doesn't need to be a massive number, but
And it,
is a petition really a petition if no one signs it? I mean, the end of the day.
and
Madam
it's
Clerk.
always at the discretion of the clerk as well.
I mean, my thought is that a petition with, I agree that you need, it's supposed to be a show of large scale support rather than an individual opinion.
Right.
So what constitutes large scale in a small town? More
Councillor
than one
Wright.
household?
I would think it depends on what they're petitioning for. If it's to accomplish something on a particular street that affects a particular number of homes, then you would expect the petition to contain at least the number of homes that item would affect.
I think you should have one number or leave it at the discretion of the clerk, but then that's putting, that's politicizing your office and we don't want to do that either. Councillor Ferreras.
I agree. I don't see why you'd want to politicize the clerk's office. I see the merit in the number, but what is the number? I think one of my council colleagues lives on a street that only has 6 or 7 residents. What if they have an issue? Are we going to reject 6 or 7 signatures? And we have a number of streets like that. So what is the right number?
Councillor Wheeldon.
Without politicizing the clerk, we could say that there is a minimum number that requirement may be waived at the clerk's discretion. So she could go lower, but not set the threshold higher. We could say minimum 10 signatures, but the clerk may decide to forward a petition with less.
Why? I guess, you know, on a small street, if there's a street issue, this is assuming the issues are based on a street. I would encourage all the members of interest to send correspondence. And then we get 10 letters on the agenda and we treat it that way, right? We treat the correspondence that way rather than as a petition, which probably shouldn't be dealing with street level issues anyway. A petition should be more a global policy based thing, you know, whatever that is, in my opinion. Go ahead, Councillor Boutwell.
I would prefer to just receive something. Right? If somebody mistakenly writes something up as a petition when it should be a correspondence, I'm happy to review the petition. So I can honestly say, I mean, it would be like 1 + 1 in my case. If it's of value to that individual, then I'll take my few minutes and read it and research
Yeah.
and think about it. I don't have a problem.
Let's just leave it the way it's written. You know, that way it is up to the clerk, and if the clerk's wise, she'll just put everything on the agenda, let council deal with it. Go ahead, Councillor Boutwell.
So in the event that the clerk rejects something, will council be informed of that?
I imagine the CAO would be informed of that. The CAO would
Is the CAO informed of that?
the CAO would inform me and I would inform council.
It's true, Mr. Mayor, to council. I think there's lots of options for people to provide information to council, and that's what the clerk's department would do at that time. If they only had 7 signatures, let's try to revamp this and put it together where 7 of you have signed this paragraph that you want to identify your issue and bring it to council. I am certain that if there was a petition that didn't make the agenda, council would hear about it if it wasn't from staff. Okay, it would be from somebody in the public.
So we went back to 13, and then I'll ask one last time if there's anything else in 13 we want to deal with. So now we'll go to 14, motions in general. And 15, motions, consideration, interpretation. There are some changes there? Madam Clerk.
When we, through you, Mayor and Council, when we were doing our training at the beginning of the term, it was mentioned that refer was, what was the definitions between defer and refer, and how come we didn't have refer put in our procedural bylaw? Here it is.
And I see that motions to refer and defer are debatable. That's what it says. Councillor Powell.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Just following the rules. So how come we've changed that defer is debatable? Because previously only time and place was, not the content of the motion. Why that change?
Madam Clerk.
I'm not sure. I took this from another procedural bylaw. I'm not sure. We can take that out.
Yeah, it's my understanding that
It's-
they would
you-
just be, it would be a time and place.
Normally, and
discussion.
usually it is,
Yeah,
yes.
so removing that and perhaps as well referring.
Okay.
Anyone else on 15? Go ahead, Councillor Wilden.
15.13, notice of motion. Is highlighted differently from other things. It is highlighted in red. I'm wondering if the clerk is able to speak to the difference there.
Sorry, which one is this?
Notice of motion
15.13.
15.13.
Sorry, I had specifically highlighted that in red because I had wanted CAO's Arthur's opinion. And that's why it's highlighted in red. It was just for my own, to bring my own attention to it.
An opinion you have received, I assume?
Yes.
Thank you.
I do have a question about notice of motion
Yeah.
though. When I want to, are you able to turn off your mic? Thank you. When I want to bring a notice of motion, it's usually in response to current events that are somewhat timely. And bringing a notice of motion that might take over a month to actually be debated is not particularly useful. When staff brings a motion to council, it is attached to a report that is sometimes over 100 pages long, and we have 3 days to consider it. But when a councillor brings a notice of motion, it is a few paragraphs long, and we require until the next meeting to consider it. I'm not sure what the discrepancy is, but it does make initiating anything as a councillor much more cumbersome.
So you can request that your notice of motion be read as a motion at the meeting. It would require, I believe it's a 2/3 majority for that to happen, and council would have to consider it urgent in nature. So part of your discussion around it, you're wanting for it to be read would be that, you know, you want to let council know why you feel it's urgent, needs to be urgently dealt with, but that is a possibility. As a courtesy, it might be wise to send members of council an advance warning that you plan to do this, so that if they want to research your notice of motion, they could come armed with discussion points or debate points. That's just my opinion, and I'd like to give people that warning if it's going to happen, because we're not here to play gotcha, right? Yeah. Madam Clerk.
I was just saying it's for transparency, right? And accountability. And it gives the council members time to review it, but not, and the public as well. Because it's not usually, I mean, usually with a staff report, majority of the time, other than planning and whatnot, I mean, there's usually lots of discussions around the different areas that we bring forward.
That discussion doesn't include council though. So we don't know about it until we get the agenda on Thursday or Friday. And we would find out about a notice of motion or councillor motion in the same amount of time. So where is the difference in transparency?
True.
Well, I think the difference is that staff bring a full report, a fulsome report. So there's detailed information in their report. Whereas The whereas statements are debatable statements in any motion.
That's true. In the past, when I brought a notice of motion, I tried to bring a full report and was told that that's not my job, which is fair, but it just makes me wonder what the point of the notice of motion is. It seems like it's very difficult to initiate something that from a council perspective. And often when people ask me, I'm a resident and I have a concern, how can I bring that forward? I end up saying, well, it's a multi-month process because you can either ask me and I can write a notice of motion and it'll take 2 or 3 meetings to get that done. Or you can try and bring a delegation to council, which is the most direct route. Or you can try and come to a committee, which can then bring a motion to council, which again is it's at least a 2-minute meeting process. And people feel like we're pretty inaccessible for a lot of these things. And again, if I'm going to bring a notice of motion, I'm not going to do it because I've got a long-standing question that I need answered. I would just ask staff if I had a long-standing issue. But if there is a timely matter that we need to address and there's no foreseeable staff report about it, then the timeliness of it, I feel like I would if I bring a notice of motion, I'm always going to want to ask that it be dealt with right away. And if I'm always going to do it that way, it's not really an exceptional circumstance anymore.
If the issue you're concerned about is requires a staff report, then rather than writing a notice of motion, my advice would be to have a conversation with the CAO. And if operationally the CAO believes that it's in fact something the staff should be dealing with, then we would get a staff report based on that conversation you had.
One of the things that we do at the task force for housing and homelessness is that when something has been identified that we can bring back to our councils, the general understanding around that table is that we would each have to write a notice of motion to our respective councils. What I'm hearing you say is that we would be better to forward details of the concern to our respective CAOs and ask them to bring a report. Is that preferential?
Nope, that's not what I'm saying. I would suggest from that perspective, from a task force, you are right. You should probably write a notice of motion because that is now a council-based political issue, not something the CAO should be asking staff to deal with, unless and until council says, CAO, we're tasking you with this. But I can't think of an example, but there are other things where one might want to write a notice of motion that is in fact operational or reportable to council through staff. So I guess it's a bit of a juggle, and I'm happy to have that conversation with you before you put pen to paper as we figure this out.
Would it be advisable, I guess I'll ask the CAO through you, would it be advisable that most notice of motions would just be asking for a staff report? Is that the preferential path for things? If I can't bring my own report on something, should I be bringing a notice of motion to ask for a report, or should I be just emailing you?
Go ahead, CAO.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Wheeldon. If there was a particular issue that any council member was concerned with, if we had the conversation and I felt that it was something that was in the direction of council. I mean, there's policies that are established and there's direction that comes from council. So if it was something that we could identify as a council concern in some fashion, then I think, I can provide direction to staff to provide that report. I wouldn't suggest the council member needs to provide a report. If you come to me and I say to you, I think that needs to be a notice of motion, it's because I'm unsure whether or not council is in the same frame of mind. And it's something that I feel needs to have a discussion at the council table. If I feel like we've already done it and I can see where you're coming from, then I can direct staff. But otherwise, if it's something that I'm unsure where council sits and how they want to direct staff, I would ask you to come back with a notice of motion.
Go ahead.
When a councillor brings a notice of motion, we currently have that it is not to be read.
Yes.
My understanding of the desire for transparency, totally get that. We want time to consider it. There isn't a report attached to it. And so we want to be able to make sure that we've understood it. If there is no discussion of it, then someone who hears it or sees it for the first time on an agenda, it has had probably no opportunity to be corrected in any misapprehensions before the next meeting, unless they contact the counselor who brought the notice of motion. And so any member of the public who reads the agenda or any counselor who reads the agenda and doesn't ask may misunderstand the notice of motion because there's been no discussion of clarification. Is it worthwhile to be able to read the motion and have questions of clarification, but not debate?
I have no issue with that if that's council's choice and direction, but the purpose of the notice of motion is to provide notice that a motion is coming forward. If there's any questions of clarification, a member of council should be reaching out to the mover of that motion and having those sidebar conversations during the week or two before it comes forward as a motion. We should not be debating it, even for clarification purposes, around the table until it becomes a motion. Anyone else on 15? Councillor Ferretis.
To the chair, thank you. I guess I share Councillor Wheeldon's frustration having put some notices of motion forward with your worship's assistance. And then sitting here twiddling my thumbs watching as the requested staff reports never materialized. And I think what Councillor Wheeldon and I are both struggling with and frustrated by is what can we do procedurally to ensure that when we bring these to get forward, that the requested action is initiated. I have no reservations, as my colleagues know, in picking up the phone and calling them or texting them to advocate for the notice of motion I'm putting out so that they have some background and knowledge. But moving them along after that is also part of the challenge.
So every time we provide direction to staff, it should hit that council direction follow-up list. And if you see that it's not on that list when it comes forward, and I understand those will be coming forward more frequently, that's the intent. And they're going to be changed to be more readable. So we will have that opportunity more often to say, I think we missed something here. And we're not getting, X, Y, and Z from, motion B. And that's something that the CAO has talked to me about already is making sure that council is kept abreast of those initiatives so that we know where things are and we can ask those very questions in council without it looking like a, board of inquiry. Councilor Boutwell.
Through you to my colleague to my right, when we make those recommendations, requesting a report back, we can always put dates on that as well for report back. We should be putting dates. We have not been, but we should be.
Councillor Ferretis.
To my colleague to the left, we did. It was supposed to be part of a study that was brought forward, and it was completely ignored and omitted from the study. The consultant was asked about it, and what we got was a lecture of what the term was. I don't need the lecture. I know what it is. I wanted to see the numbers, and we didn't get it, which is why we rejected the study and sent it back. That shouldn't be happening.
Right. Right. You can have a more specific conversation with the CAO, or maybe you already have. Very well. I suspected that was true. Councillor Wright.
Just going back to the refer, defer portion of 15. There's also a tabling of a motion that's not listed in here as well. Just wondering if that should be included.
Is 15.7 is a motion to lay on the table.
Is it, or am I just not seeing it? 55. Okay, I have 46 of 78 and 55 of 86 on the same page.
78.
48 of 78. Ah, all right. Got it.
Anything further on 15? Article 16, resolutions. There are no changes. Yeah, there are no changes listed from the clerk's office. Members of council. Article 17, voting. There are no changes recommended from the clerk's office. Members of council. Article 18, bylaws. There are no recommendations made from the clerk's office. Members of council. Article 19, disclosure of pecuniary interest. There are no recommendations made from the clerk's office. Members of council. Councillor Wheeldon.
Is this something that is also part of another policy? I'm wondering if this is code of conduct? No?
So the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act sets out certain things, but isn't quite so prescriptive.
Thank you.
Article 20, committees. There are no changes recommended from the clerk's office. Members of council. That's Article 21. We're almost there. Councillor Wheeldon.
I don't see anything here differentiating between an advisory committee and a working committee. Is that something we want to codify, or is that present somewhere else?
Madam Clerk.
Through you, Mayor. We don't have working committees.
Oh, yes, but we do. Applefest and community events are both considered
They're steering committee,
steering committees.
not
Thank you.
working committees.
Thank you. So no differentiation of those either here, is there?
I believe that's because we have a policy. And it's all in the policy. So we don't want to. Like really, we could even take that committee structure completely out because we have a policy for them, but we left that in.
So why don't we remove it from this
We can,
list? Because if we have a committee policy,
we do.
why is it in we shouldn't have it in our procedure bylaw. Everyone okay removing Article 20?
When we remove these articles, there will still be reference to a policy or?
Yeah.
Yeah.
We'll write in there. Sorry, we will put in brackets. Like we'll list it, but it'll just be listed underneath the indexing and it'll just say to go to the policy. Okay.
Deputy Clerk?
I was gonna say a similar thing, that maybe you keep Article 20 committees and then procedure that underneath procedure, instead of having what we have, just have, please see
The policy.
the policy.
Councillor Wright?
Will those be linked on the website to?
We could definitely make that
Yeah.
happen.
Councillor Wheeldon?
So in so doing, are we delegating authority similar to a regulation as compared to a statute? Are we, policies can be changed internally without a motion of council? Is that, no?
No,
Okay.
No, municipal policies would come forward as a as a report from staff for any changes.
Okay.
Or,
The same as for the procedural bylaw.
or if we wanted a policy, we could direct staff to create one.
Right.
Okay, I was just wondering about the distinction between a bylaw and a policy under a bylaw.
Well, so council creates policies and they govern the policies. So we can't just change a policy. We have to bring it back to council. But we do a resolution through councils to allow us to make an amendment or to change a policy. But you're right, you're correct. We don't have a bylaw for certain policies, but yes.
But some of these things that we have removed, we will reference
Yes.
back to either, in one case, the municipal act, in this case, the policy for committees, et cetera. So that people are aware where they can find that information.
Correct.
Article 21, requirements, council and committees of council. There's a recommended deletion and a replacement here, Madam Clerk.
It's because we only used audio recordings previously, and now we are doing video recordings. That's why it's changed.
Oh, keeping up with technology.
Right.
Yeah. Councillor Botwell.
Thank you. Is there a reason why we are not saying shall be audio or video recorder when it comes to point 221.11? Meetings may be audio or video recorded, broadcast and or live streamed publicly,
Because it's not through legislation. We do not have to video,
but we could indicate here that we would do it.
but it's not through legislation. Like legislation requires us to do certain things,
Mhm.
and legislation does not require us to do video recordings.
But council can set its bylaws so that
We can,
we
but that's
we are
why I've
committed to-
done it
yeah,
that way.
understood.
Okay.
Deputy Clerk.
So as the person who sits back here with all the live streaming stuff, I wouldn't suggest putting shall, because then if something goes wrong, then we wouldn't be able to have the meeting.
You would have to suspend your rules.
Right.
Which we can do with 2/3, correct?
Sure can, but technology is really difficult sometimes
That
too,
would,
right?
from my view, it would be,
Okay,
it
so
would be a
if-
little harder to.
So if you said, we've got a glitch this evening, the chair could say, well, can we get a motion to suspend the rules for this meeting due to the technical difficulties?
Yeah, we could do
Yeah.
that.
Because it doesn't sound like that would be much more cumbersome
Yeah.
than a 45-second interruption.
And I hear what Councillor Botwell's saying here. By putting may in here, we're suggesting it's okay if we don't. You know, if you know, one day staff feel like maybe they've been hard done by and it's been a hard day and I just don't feel and I know I know you would never do that, so I'm just kidding around. But I have no, I think we should put shall in here. I think I think it behooves us to want to make sure that this is available to the public.
One other comment, there was a meeting that you guys had, that was more training related, and did go into closed session, but, we did not live stream the meeting prior because it was held at Codrington Fire Hall, where I have no equipment to do so. So that would be my only other.
So in that case, the first motion we put on the floor
Yeah.
is to suspend this portion of the procedure bylaw
Yeah.
for that meeting. And we would understand, and we could include that in the agenda so we
Right.
understand that's gonna happen.
It would just be something we have to be
Yeah,
mindful
yeah.
of as well, because sometimes that happens.
I've written shall. Everybody okay with that? Councillor Wheeldon?
Would it be appropriate to acknowledge in the wording that it isn't always possible? Wherever possible? Meetings shall?
I think you just leave it as shall, and when it's not possible, we deal with it procedurally. I'm comfortable with that, and then there's no wishy-washy wording in your procedure bylaw. Yeah. Anyone else? So the rest are schedules and additions and forms, etc. Do we want to go through these? When I ask a question like that, it means I don't. So if you do, let me know. There are some changes to some of the forms. We've removed the conflict of interest form because we really should be using the electronic declaration through iCompass. Sorry.
Pardon me, you didn't have your mic on for that.
But I did. All right, anything else from members of council with regard to the staff report procedural bylaw review? Councilor Butwell?
Thank you, and forgive me on this. I was making notes about this the morning, yesterday morning or perhaps Saturday morning, and I did not write the item number. I wrote down a note, and perhaps someone can direct us, where there was a change from 2/3 being a majority to 3/4 being a majority. Does that sound familiar to anyone else? It must have been early on because it is my third note. That we didn't change any of those? Okay. I don't know why I didn't put reference numbers down. I was following through. Okay, so no changes on any of those.
It does say in the definitions that majority means more than half and majority vote means more than half of the votes.
It referred to, I can't remember now. Does that sound familiar to you though?
Yeah, something like 2/3 is reported.
Was changed from 2/3 to 3/4, which would have increased it from 4 to 5 members of council. If you give me a moment, I'll go through.
While they're looking, if I may ask another question, can we get hyperlinks in the procedural bylaw document to all of the attached or referenced documents? Awesome, thank you.
Where is it?
That has to do with motion to refer. So item 15.5. To allow for transparency for the public, if a standing committee refers an item to a future meeting, council shall not consider the item without a 3/4 majority prior to the future meeting to which it was referred. Just above 15.5.1.
Yeah. and
It's also in 15.6.
And I believe that would previously have been a 2/3. So that's been changed as well.
I think these were both add-ons based on another procedure bylaw, if I recall the comment from before. So if it's our practice to do 2/3, I think we can stick with 2/3.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, for a council of 7, it doesn't make much of a difference whether you do 2/3 or 3/4. You're looking for a super majority, that's all. Councilor Wright.
I have a quick reference, Robert's rules. And refer is supposed to be majority, which would be the 3/4. There's only 2 that have the 2/3, the limit, debate, and closed discussion. Right, so a refer and defer would be, it doesn't have the defer one up here, but I would assume that it would be a majority. So,
Which would just be 4 out of 7.
Right.
Yep.
2/3 is actually 4.6, which
Yeah,
rounds up to
For
5
for us, it's 5 out of 7 for 2/3.
for 2/3. So then if the Roberts rules, you said? Robert's
Mhm.
rules. So that's just majority, so it should be perhaps 4 out of 7.
So, so Robert's rules comes into effect when things are outside the bylaw. So if it's our choice in creating this bylaw, if we want a supermajority or a simple majority, and what do we want that supermajority to look like? Entirely up to us. And we can do 2/3 or 3/4, and we can change it based on how we want. It's our bylaw at the end of the day. And how we govern our council. Go ahead, Councilor Wheeler.
I did have a question about the point where this is found. I forgot to ask it earlier. To allow for transparency for the public, if a standing committee refers an item to a future meeting, council shall not consider the item without a 3/4 majority vote prior to the future meeting to which it was referred. When would such a vote prior to the meeting occur? I would think that we would vote in the meeting unless you wanted to have more than one meeting in between, because we don't vote by email.
Yeah, that line doesn't make any sense to me at all, actually.
Perhaps may I make a recommendation?
Yeah.
If I may, Mr. Chair. Seeing that you indicated, clerk, that these were cut and pasted from elsewhere, perhaps those 2 sections could get a bit of a reviewed into,
Yeah.
would hate to agree with something that takes out something that was already there that was not broken.
Exactly.
Are you making a motion to refer?
Please don't.
Motion to refer.
Please don't. So you'll review that. And then when we go to pass the bylaw in council, you can have, in your report, you can outline what has changed. Okay. So I have a motion moved by Councillor Fredis and Deputy Mayor Anderson, second by Deputy Mayor Anderson, but I have made some changes because we are not simply accepting all the changes that were made. We made some amendments. So Councillor Fredis, I have made the following. I'm just going to read what I've written, and you can let me know if you're okay with it. The staff report that staff report procedural bylaw be received for information, and that the committee of the whole recommends that council adopt changes as amended for a revised procedure bylaw. Yes, Deputy Clerk.
Sorry, before you get that motion, there's a few things in the staff report that we're kind of looking for direction on that we haven't really hit. Some of them we have based on the review, but a few things that we haven't discussed are the land acknowledgement statement. And there's a specific part in the report that says staff is seeking direction or
yep.
decision.
So the land acknowledgement statement, you're looking for advice on whether to remove it as a rote document, which I haven't been using anyway. And I'll tell you why. I think I've spoken to several of you about this, but I don't do the rote because I think it loses its meaning. And so I often will, in my spare time, go looking for land acknowledgements and mold them to our territory, our area. I've been using one from former Chief Mowat that he provided to Trent Hills at one time. I've been using Ontario Federation of Labor. I've been using one, I think, right out of Truth and Reconciliation. And as I said, just changing the territorial acknowledgement portion for the Mississaugas of Alderville, specifically the Mississaugas of Alderville. So, and I prefer that. I just think it has more meaning if the wording changes from time to time, rather than being wrote over and over again. Because the one I read tonight is the Northumberland County one, and I could read that one in my sleep because I've said it so often. But I will read it from time to time because it's in my mix. So is council okay with that? Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So in the early first year of our term, I took a couple of courses online through the municipality, and we spoke specifically, they were speaking specifically about land acknowledgements, not necessarily being the most genuine thing if they tick off all the boxes, that it's refreshing to hear about people's connections with the land that we're living on, and that really might be a direction that could be explored and is more indicative of a respect for the land itself. So I like that you mix it up, and I'd encourage you to keep mixing.
Mixing I will do. Councillor Fredis.
To the chair. So I noticed in here the recommendation is that advisory committees and boards are now also required to do the land acknowledgement.
We should do an land acknowledgement every time we meet. As a municipal group, committee, council, board, external agencies, all of those things. It's good and right to do, and it is one of the 92 recommendations out of the Truth and Reconciliation report.
I have no issue with it. I was just pointing it out.
Yeah. So for that purpose, I think it would be okay to have a rote one for the chair. I don't think it's fair to ask a volunteer to, come up with something. So if we have using the Northumberland County one that I used tonight is probably a good one. It did come from our friends in Alderville, so it probably is fine to use that one.
Through you, Mayor.
Yep.
So we could just add that to our policy for the committees
Yeah.
then.
Yeah.
Okay.
Councillor Wright?
Could they have the opportunity to do one of their own if they so chose?
I think so, yeah. Yeah, because we're not going to put it rote on the agenda. It'll just say land acknowledgement, and the clerk will give them the script if they want to use it, or they can do their own as well. I think that's fine. Okay, so staff is seeking direction and decisions from council for the following. 4.154, closed session, electronic meetings. During training, council had mentioned a possible desire for council members attending a meeting virtually to confirm that they are alone in a room and or be required to use headphones during the closed session portion of the meeting. Would council like this addition? I think it's a good idea to acknowledge that you are alone and or not broadcasting to other people in your home or the bathroom at the hotel or wherever you happen to be. Best council meeting ever, by the way, Councillor Whalen.
I think I had poutine during that.
I think you did have poutine. Okay, so yes, clerks, we will add that. 10.3.5 and 10.3.6, delegation of alternate chair. These sections state that the absence of the mayor, deputy mayor, and alternate chair should be appointed at the beginning of the meeting. Would council like this changed or begin using this process when needed? I think we should use this process as needed, my opinion. Yeah, we're good. So we will carry on. Next bullet, as recommended during the training, it is recommended that citizens comment. We already dealt with that.
Nope, that.
10.3.22 adjournment. Currently, the section states that meetings will be adjourned by the chair. During meetings of council, the meeting is adjourned by motion, and during committee of the whole meetings, the meeting is adjourned by the chair. I like that practice. But it doesn't matter. I mean, it really doesn't matter. Do you want me just to adjourn the meetings, or I prefer adjourning by motion for council meetings and adjourning committee meetings by the chair or motion, whatever happens first. Everyone okay with that? So just as we've been doing it. Yeah. So those are the things that were asked for in the report. Is there anything else that the clerk's department would like us to provide instruction for? No?
Nope.
So the motion still stands as read, and the resolution after receiving is that we recommend that council adopt changes as amended for a revised procedure bylaw. Deputy Mayor, you're okay with that? That change I made? Yes. Is there any discussion on the motion? All those in favor? There being none opposed, that motion's carried. Brings us to question period. Is there anyone in the gallery with a question on tonight's agenda? Yeah, I should think you'd want to use it. Mr. Green, question period is an opportunity for members of the public to ask questions about items that appeared on this evening's agenda. Members are asked to state their name for the record before asking their question. A maximum of 5 minutes is set aside for question period. Language, content, and conduct must remain respectful at all times. Questions will be received and answered by the mayor or by a member of council or staff if designated by the mayor. Mr. Green.
I have that memorized like you do.
Hmm.
As it relates to the keeping of the citizens' comments and question period, may I say thank you?
You may. Thank you for your question. We have no in-camera session this evening. It is 8:10 p.m. I'll adjourn this committee of the whole meeting with